The sound I remember isn't the grab. It's my coffee cup tipping over the edge of the counter and shattering on the tile while a man I'd never met decided I was trash that had wandered into the wrong room. His forearm was across my collarbone. My back was against cold steel. "Are you slow?" he hissed. I said, "Leave." 40 strangers watched, and the only thing moving through my mind wasn't fear. It was the strange, quiet certainty that this man had no idea what he had just done. I need to be honest with you before I tell you the rest. I've started this story 3 times and deleted it twice, because part of me still doesn't know how to talk about it without sounding like I'm bragging or like I'm asking for sympathy. I'm not. I'm telling you because somewhere out there is a person who keeps getting looked through, and I want them to hear how this ended. My name is Diane Marek. I'm 43. I've spent most of my adult life being the least memorable person in every room I walked into, and for a long time, that was the whole point. That morning I was wrecked. 3 flights in 2 days, 1 canceled connection, a layover that ate an entire night. I'd come up through the Midwest on a route that made no sense, the kind of itinerary you only get when the system reroutes you and shrugs. By the time I reached that lounge above Concourse C at O'Hare, I felt like my bones weighed more than my bag. Gray light came through the tall windows. Rain streaked the glass. I just wanted to sit. I wore a plain charcoal jacket, black trousers, flat shoes. Nothing about me said anything. That was deliberate. For nearly 20 years I'd worked in corners of the service that don't have signs on the doors, rooms with no windows, jobs where being forgettable wasn't an accident. It was a skill. Sometimes it was the entire skill. I noticed him before he noticed me. You learn to do that. He sat near the entrance with a younger guy, both of them in civilian clothes that couldn't hide what they were. Broad through the shoulders, that haircut, an expensive watch worn like a habit, and on his forearm, half under his sleeve, a tattoo I recognized the mark his community earns and never takes lightly. He looked exactly like what he was. Confident, respected, used to being the one beloved to. I looked at him once, then I went back to my coffee and forgot him. He didn't forget me. The first warning was his chair scraping back. The second was that he was walking straight at my table, not past it. I figured he wanted directions, or an outlet, or the time. Normal things. Instead he stopped over me and folded his arms. "Excuse me," he said. I looked up. "Yes?" His face was already set. "This is a restricted lounge." I blinked at him. "I know. Then you know it's authorized personnel only." For a second I genuinely didn't follow. Then I did, and I almost laughed out loud. He thought I'd snuck in. He thought I was a tired tourist who'd slipped past a desk. "I'm aware," I said. "You need to go." I just looked at him. People nearby had started to listen. The younger one by the door shifted, uncomfortable. The older man, his name, I'd learn, was Wade Coltrane, didn't notice or didn't care. "I'm fine where I am," I said. "No," he said. "You're not. And here's the thing I want you to understand. Because it's the part everyone gets wrong. I had my identification 3 seconds from my fingers. I could have ended the entire thing right there, before it ever became anything. 1 card, 3 seconds. I didn't reach for it. Maybe I was too tired. Maybe I was curious. Maybe after 18 years of watching people reveal exactly who they are the moment they think no one important is watching, I wanted to see how far he'd take it. That was my choice, and I'll own it. I let it run. "I think we're done here," I said. His jaw flexed. "We're not." The younger SEAL came halfway out of his chair. Not enough to stop anything. Just enough to show he didn't like it. Coltrane ignored him completely. "Last time," he said, and his voice dropped into something colder. "Get up." I shook my head. "No." After that, it happened fast. He reached down and closed his hand around my upper arm. The grip shocked even me. I'd trained with hard men. And this was real strength, the kind that doesn't ask. He hauled me up. My chair went over backward and cracked against the floor. Someone gasped. My coffee cup hit the tile and broke. And then his forearm came across my chest and my spine slammed into the steel edge of the bar, and pain flared up my back, bright and immediate. It wasn't the worst pain I've felt. It was just enough to make me very, very angry. But I have spent a career learning that anger is a loaded thing, and the safety is patience. So I went still. He read that stillness as surrender. They almost always do. He grabbed my phone off the table and threw it down the length of the counter. It skidded 20 feet and spun. "Now get out," he said. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The whole room held its breath. And I stood there pinned against cold steel, thinking how strange it was that after everything I'd seen, every classified briefing, every night that ended with names, I couldn't say out loud. The thing finally pushing me toward a decision I'd been dodging for months was a man who literally could not imagine that a quiet woman might outrank him by a prate. Mille. Then my phone rang. The bartender, a heavy-set man in his 50s with kind, tired eyes, picked it up almost on reflex. He glanced at the screen. He answered it, and a voice came out of that little speaker loud enough for half the lounge to hear. Release her. Coltrane went rigid. The voice came again, flat and absolute. That's an order, Chief. And I watched something happen in his body that his mind hadn't agreed to yet. His arm came off my chest. Not because he understood, because instinct goes deeper than understanding, and some part of him recognized command the way you recognize a sound from childhood. He stepped back. Confusion spread across his face like a stain. I want to pause here, because if you've ever been in a room where someone decided you were nobody, where they talked over you, or past you, or looked at you the way you'd look at furniture, then you already know the feeling that was rising in my chest. It isn't triumph. Not yet. It's something older. It's the quiet voice that says, you saw the surface, and you guessed wrong, and you guessed wrong out loud. I straightened my jacket. I rolled my shoulders back, and the voice on the phone said, put Commander Marek on the line. The bartender looked at me. The younger SEAL looked at me. 40 strangers looked at me. I walked the length of the bar, picked up my phone, and put it to my ear. Marek speaking. The silence in that room became total. I'm in the terminal, the voice said. It belonged to Captain Russell Vance, and I'd have known it anywhere. 2 minutes out. You don't need to come, I said. Don't let that man leave, he said. Then the line went dead. I lowered the phone and turned around, and Wade Coltrane was staring at me like a man who'd just heard the ice crack under his own feet. Honestly, if that had been me on the other side of it, if I'd been the one who'd just grabbed a stranger and found out she could end my whole life with a sentence, I don't know how I'd have stayed standing. I want to say I'd have had the spine to face it. I'm not sure that's true. The thing about silence is that it's never empty. It fills with everything people are too afraid to say. And in that lounge it had weight. It settled on the coffee cups and the leather chairs and the rain-streaked glass. It settled on Wade Coltrane most of all. A minute earlier he'd been pure forward motion. Now he stood with his hands loose at his sides, like a man retracing his steps to figure out exactly where he'd walked off the edge. The younger SEAL had gone pale around the mouth. He kept looking from Coltrane to me to the phone in my hand, like he was hoping one of those things would rearrange into something less catastrophic. The bartender cleared his throat. Ma'am, he said quietly, are you hurt? I looked at him and saw embarrassment. The kind, decent people feel when something ugly happens close to them. As if the room itself had failed and they happened to be standing in it. I'm all right, I said. It wasn't quite true. The spot on my chest still burned. My arm throbbed where his fingers had been. My back ached against the memory of steel. None of it mattered much. Bodies collect bruises and carry on. Pride is the slower thing to heal. Not because it's fragile, but because it remembers. Coltrane opened his mouth. Commander, don't, I said. Just the one word. It stopped him better than shouting would have. I went back to my chair, and I'll tell you why. Because sitting down was a choice. Because standing there like something broken would have made everyone comfortable in the wrong way. Because if 20 years in this work has taught me one thing, it's that a room takes its shape from whoever refuses to panic. So I sat. I set my fallen chair upright. Small order. Restored in the middle of large disorder. And while we waited for Captain Vance, I thought about the career that had made this possible. Not the one people saw. The other one. My mother told her church friends I worked in naval logistics. She'd say it with a little shrug that meant she was proud but had no idea what I did. My brother once introduced me at a wedding as Diane. She does paperwork for the Navy, and laughed like it was a joke we shared. I let him. I'd been letting people make me smaller for so long I'd stopped noticing the shape of the habit. On paper, I was a commander. In practice, for most of my career, I'd been a ghost with a desk. I worked in rooms where the clocks showed 3 time zones and nobody trusted natural light. Rooms that smelled like scorched coffee and printer toner and stress. Rooms where the floor hummed because too many machines were running at once. My job wasn't heroic the way the movies sell heroism. I didn't kick doors. I didn't drop out of helicopters. I didn't wear that tattoo on my arm or carry a rifle through dust. I found people. That's the simplest way to say it. I took fragments, half a transmission, a satellite frame buried in cloud, a pattern in how trucks moved, a phone that lit up in the wrong place at the wrong hour, and I built a picture clear enough that other people could bet their lives on it. Sometimes I found hostages. Sometimes I found weapons. Sometimes I found teams that had gone silent when silence meant the worst thing. And sometimes I found a way out where everyone else saw only walls. 14 years before Wade Coltrane put his hands on me, 6 operators were pinned in a mountain valley in a storm that came down like a verdict. Late autumn, colder than anyone forecast. Wind that tore sound into pieces and clouds so low every ridge became a blind corner. They'd gone in light. Watch, confirm, leave. That was the plan. Plans are glass. People talk about them like they're built of steel. But they're glass strong until the exact wrong pressure finds the exact wrong spot. They were compromised before dawn. By dark, the enemy was working both flanks. By midnight, the extraction window had folded, and command quietly began to believe they were gone. I was 30 then, a lieutenant commander, too young for the authority I was about to grab, and too experienced to pretend I didn't understand what grabbing it would cost. I'd been watching that valley for 9 days. Not glancing at a feed between meetings, watching. I knew the goat trails, the dry creek beds, the way weather slid over the ridgeline when the wind turned after dark. I knew where the enemy liked to stage, and where they wouldn't go unless they had no choice left. When the official route closed, everyone started saying the same word. Delay. Delay until morning. Delay until the storm lifts. Delay until aircraft can see. But delay isn't neutral. Delay kills quietly, while reasonable people discuss safer options. The team leader came over the net once. I remember his breathing more than his words. 1 critical, he said. 2 walking wounded. Ammo's low. Then static ate the rest. There are moments in this work where every single option is wrong, and the only question left is which wrong thing gives life a chance. I found a seam in the weather at 3:17 inches the morning. 4 minutes wide. Maybe 5. Not enough for doctrine. Barely enough for madness. A narrow break forming southeast of them. Running along a ridge no one wanted to fly because the terrain looked like suicide on a flat map. But maps lie when they flatten mountains. I'd stared at that ground so long it didn't look flat to me anymore. It rose in my mind. It turned. It breathed. I could feel the route like a thread under my fingers. I built the track. I argued for it. I defended it to people who outranked me and recomputed it every 90 seconds as the storm shifted. For 3 hours I spoke in a voice steadier than I felt while pilots flew through weather that does not forgive. I remember a chief at my shoulder, his voice barely a whisper. "You sure, ma'am?" "Yes," I said. Though certainty was a luxury nobody in that room actually had. At 4:11, 2 aircraft reached the ridge. At 4:16, 6 men were aboard. At 4:18, the storm closed behind them like a door. 6 came home. 1 didn't. His name was Petty Officer Caleb Strand. He'd held the northern approach long enough for the others to live until the birds arrived. I knew that because I'd watched the whole terrible geometry of it from above. His position went still before the weather opened. I didn't stop working when it happened. I couldn't. Stopping for the dead would have killed the living. That's an arithmetic no one should ever have to learn. But once you learn it, you never put it down. For 14 years I carried Caleb Strand's name in a place no one could see. The reports were classified. The commendations were scrubbed. The rescue became a story inside that community, and I stayed a blank space inside the story. That was how the work functioned. That was how I functioned. And sitting in that lounge, looking at the tattoo on Wade Coltrane's arm, I felt the past tilt toward the present. He was the right age, the right community, the right generation of that war. A cold thought slid through me that it was possible, just possible, that the man who'd thrown my phone down a bar was alive because 14 years ago I'd found a seam in a storm. Captain Vance came through the doors 2 minutes later, though it felt longer because everyone had been counting without admitting it. The doors sighed open, and he stepped through with that controlled urgency that doesn't look like hurry because it's been trained out of a person. 50-something, tall and spare, silver at the temples, the 4 stripes on his shoulder settled the room before he said a word. His eyes found me first. That mattered. He didn't look at Coltrane. He didn't look at the younger SEAL. He didn't scan for the loudest person. He came straight to me and stopped at a respectful distance and lowered his voice. "Commander Marek, I'm sorry I'm late. I stood, because you do. Nothing happened that can't be handled, sir. His eyes moved once over my arm, then my jacket, then the way I was holding myself. Not obvious concern, Vance is too disciplined for that. But I'd worked with him long enough to recognize a quiet inventory of damage. That's not the same as nothing happening, he said. No, sir. Only then did he turn. And Wade Coltrane had come to attention without deciding to. Shoulders squared, hands flat at his sides, chin tucked. The body remembered what the mind was still refusing. Chief Coltrane, Vance said. The younger SEAL's face changed. So did Coltrane's. Until that second, some small part of him might have been hoping this was a mix-up, that the voice on the phone had the wrong name, that I wasn't who the room now suspected. But Vance knew him, and Vance knew me. Sir, Coltrane said. The edge was gone from his voice. What was left was thinner, almost formal. You put your hands on Commander Marek. He swallowed. Yes, sir. You pinned a senior officer against a bar in a public lounge. Yes, sir. You threw her phone. Yes, sir. The room didn't move. Even the rain seemed quieter against the glass. Vance stepped closer. He didn't raise his voice. Men like Vance never need volume. Authority does the work for them. Were you threatened? No, sir. Was she aggressive? No, sir. Did she claim to be a civilian? Forcing her way in? Coltrane's jaw tightened. No, sir. Then explain to me why I'm standing here. And for one dangerous second I thought he'd take the coward's road. I didn't know who she was. She looked like she didn't belong. There were a dozen versions available to him, all of them polished smooth by pride. Instead he looked at the floor. Because I was wrong, sir. I want to stop here and say something honest. That answer surprised me. I'd braced for an excuse, and what I got was a man choosing the harder sentence. It didn't fix anything, but it told me there might be something underneath the costume worth correcting. You were more than wrong, Vance said. Yes, sir. The younger SEAL near the door had gone rigid. He looked too young for the weight in his face. 26, maybe. A ratey. Henri in one. His bag had a name tape on it. Mercer. I'd noticed it earlier, because I always notice names. Names are how you remind yourself that nobody is only a role. Vance turned slightly toward me. Commander, do you want airport police involved? Coltrane's eyes closed for half a second. And there it was. The power, clean and terrible. The whole room felt it shift into my hands. A complaint would be justified. Witnesses everywhere. The assault was plain. His career, his reputation, his command, his future, all of it now balanced on what I decided to do with my anger. And I had anger. That part matters. Mercy means nothing if there's no anger underneath it. Forgiveness offered too fast is usually just fear in good clothes. But before I could answer, someone stood at the back of the lounge. He'd been sitting in a corner chair by the windows, half hidden behind a pillar and a tired potted plant, mid-50s, close-cropped gray hair, a jacket that fit like it used to cover a bigger man. He moved with the heaviness of someone whose joints remember old weather and old injuries. Sir, he said. Vance turned. The man didn't look at Vance. He looked at me. What operation were you talking about? The question landed strange. It didn't belong to the present. It came from somewhere deeper. Vance's eyes narrowed. I don't believe anyone was speaking to you, Senior Chief. So Vance knew him too. The man nodded once. No, sir. I understand that. But I heard the year. I heard the ridge. My hands went still. He took one step forward. Afghanistan. Late autumn. Storm boxed in the valley. A small element. One man critical before extraction. Nobody breathed. Coltrane turned toward him slowly. Senior Chief Halloran. The older man ignored him completely. His eyes stayed on me. Tell me I'm wrong, he said. There are ghosts that won't stay buried because they were never dead. They were only waiting for the right room, the right witness. A name spoken carelessly enough to crack the door open. I felt Caleb Strand's name rise in my chest. Vance looked at me, and in that one glance I read the question, do you want this stopped? And I could have stopped it. I'd done it 1,000 times. A polite correction, a cold look, a sentence about inappropriate conversation in a public space. The old machinery was right there, familiar and waiting. Instead I said, what's your name? The man straightened. Marcus Halloran, ma'am? Senior Chief, retired. His voice roughened. I was on that ridge. For a moment the lounge dissolved around me. The bar, the chairs, the rain, the strangers gone. Only the mountains stayed. The screens, the static. The little green tracks crawling across a map. We never knew, Halloran said. They told us somebody found a road through. They never gave us a name. We asked. Every year, we asked. His face tightened. Was it you? I heard the younger seal pull in a breath. I heard Coltrane stop moving entirely. I heard the old rule whisper its old advice. Give them nothing. Let the silence protect you. But protection and hiding had worn the same face for far too long. I looked at Marcus Halloran. 6 of you came home, I said. His eyes filled before he could stop them. God, he whispered. It was you. He didn't come toward me after he said it. That told me something about him. A younger man might have crossed the room without thinking, grabbed my hands, pulled me into some grateful embrace because feeling had outrun judgment. Halloran stayed where he was. He understood distance. He understood permission. He understood that some truths shouldn't be approached fast. He kept one hand on the back of a leather chair, not because he needed it, I think, but because a man needs somewhere to put his body when the past comes walking toward him. I was 38, he said. Old enough to know better than to think we were getting out. No one interrupted. Even Vance let the room become Halloran's. We'd watched that valley for days. Bad ground, bad weather, bad feeling from the start. You know how that is. He looked at me, and I nodded once. I did know. First shot came before dawn. Not close enough to kill anyone. Close enough to say they'd found our edge. By noon they were on both sides. By dark they had us boxed. He paused. Strand was on the north approach. Caleb Strand. He said the name the way people say something sacred. He was 27. Had a daughter he'd only seen twice because the deployments kept eating the calendar. Carried her picture in a plastic sleeve in his kit. Showed it to anybody who held still. We gave him hell for it. We all looked every time. A woman near the coffee station put a hand over her mouth. Halloran didn't seem to see her. When command told us the window was closed, we all knew what it meant. They don't say you're on your own. They say weather is below minimums. They say airspace is unsafe. They say hold position. But when you're bleeding on a ridge with your ammo running out, you learn to translate that language fast. Coltrane stood by the bar, completely still now. The younger SEAL had dropped his eyes to the floor. We had one man critical, Halloran said. 2 hurt, too bad to move quick. Strand kept the north side from folding. Every time they pushed, he answered. Every time I figured that flank was gone, he was still there. Last thing I heard him say was almost calm. He said, tell them to hurry if they're coming. He looked down. I didn't think they were coming. That's the truth of it. And the old room came back around me. The screens throwing blue light onto exhausted faces. Coffee burned down to tar. A weather officer reading numbers in a voice that wanted to crack and wouldn't let itself. The hum of machines. The smell of hot plastic and human fear. I could see Caleb Strand's track again. The north side. The position Halloran was describing. The red closing in. The small, stubborn space one man kept alive with his own body. There was a moment, Halloran said, when the radio went quiet, and I thought maybe that was mercy. Maybe we'd stop hearing all the ways we weren't going to make it. He laughed once, soft. It wasn't humor. It was disbelief that had survived 14 years. Then I heard rotors. I thought I was hallucinating. I genuinely did. I thought, this is what the mind does at the end. It hands you the sound of rescue, because the real thing isn't coming. He looked at Vance, then back to me. But it came. The lounge wasn't a lounge anymore, in the ordinary sense. It had become a room full of witnesses, every person in it suddenly responsible for holding something true with care. 2 birds came through that weather. Nobody should have flown. I saw one light through the cloud, just once, and then it was there. Men shouting, dragging the wounded. Strand wasn't moving. I asked where he was, and somebody just said, North side. That's all. North side. His voice thinned to almost nothing. I've heard those 2 words in my sleep for 14 years. I didn't realize I'd stepped forward until I was closer to him. Petty Officer Strand held that approach for 46 minutes after his partner went down, I said. Halloran's head came up. I didn't look away. The enemy's cleanest path to your position ran through that northern cut. If they'd taken it before the aircraft arrived, the extraction fails. The pilots fly into a kill zone, or they wave off. Strand knew that. He held it long past the point where holding it could save him. A tear moved down Halloran's face. He made no move to hide it. He bought you the time, I said. Yes, I said. He did. Those words landed in the room differently than all the others. Not dramatic. Not loud. Just true. Halloran closed his eyes for a moment. I named my grandson Caleb, he said. My daughter asked why. I told her he was a man who paid a debt for all of us before any of us knew how much we owed. Behind him, Wade Coltrane made a sound so small I nearly missed it. Not a sob, not a gasp. More like breath catching on something sharp. Halloran turned then, slowly. For the first time he looked fully at Coltrane. You know what she did, Chief? Coltrane couldn't answer. Halloran's voice hardened not with cruelty, but with the authority of a man who's earned the right to be disappointed. Men like you and me spent our careers coming home because people like her sat in rooms with no windows and found the road back. We got the medals you can see. They carried the names you can't. Coltrane had lost all his color. I didn't know, he said. And the sentence came out weak. Halloran stared at him. That's not the defense you think it is. It hit harder than anything Vance had said. I watched Coltrane absorb it, and for the first time there was no pride in his face. No performance, no hardman confidence. Just a man standing inside the full size of what he'd done. Ma'am, he said, and his voice shook. I don't deserve forgiveness. He was right. But that had never been the most important question. I want to tell you what I understood in that moment, because it's the thing nobody else in that room could see. The decision in front of me wasn't really about Wade Coltrane at all. It was about who I'd be when I finally stopped hiding. For 14 years, I'd let silence do double duty. It protected the work, sure, but it also protected me from being seen. And somewhere along the way, I'd let those two things blur until disappearing felt like virtue. This was the moment I got to choose differently. You grabbed me, I said. Yes, ma'am. You pinned me against a bar. Yes, ma'am. You threw my phone because you wanted me powerless. His mouth tightened. Yes, ma'am. And you didn't do it because I was a commander, I said. You did it because you decided I was nobody. He swallowed. Yes, ma'am. I stepped closer, not enough to threaten, just enough that he couldn't pretend my words belonged to the whole room instead of to him. That's the part you carry. Not my rank, not Captain Vance, not Senior Chief Halloran, not even the chance that I'm connected to men you respect. The wrong thing happened before you knew any of that. The wrong thing was the decision you made when you looked at a quiet woman and gave yourself permission. His eyes reddened. I know. No, I said. You understand it right now, knowing it will take longer. He nodded once. I turned to Vance. Sir, I want consequences. Real ones. A written record. Witness statements. Command involvement. Whatever corrective process you think is proportionate. Coltrane didn't flinch. That mattered, but I don't want his career ended today. Vance studied me. That's mercy he hasn't earned. I know. Then why give it? I looked past him at the rain on the glass. At the strangers who'd been dragged into the most private public moment of my life. At Halloran, standing there with grief and gratitude fighting on his face. At Mercer, the younger SEAL, who looked like he'd aged years since breakfast. Because destruction is easy, I said. Correction is hard. And if there's a better version of this man in there, the service needs that version more than the world needs one more bitter person telling himself he got ruined by bad luck. Vance nodded slowly. Very well. Then he turned to Coltrane. You heard the commander. You'll get every consequence she just asked for. And you will not mistake her mercy for dismissal. You assaulted a senior officer. You humiliated yourself. This command, and that mark on your arm. From today, you earn back. Trust one watch, one order, one decision at a time. And every time you feel sorry for yourself, you'll remember that the woman you put your hands on asked me to correct you instead of end you. Yes, sir, Coltrane said, low. Vance leaned in slightly. And Chief, if you ever again confuse strength with the right to frighten someone weaker than you, I won't need the commander's permission. It won't happen again, sir. Weeks later, Coltrane requested 5 minutes with me through proper channels. He came to my office in uniform, cover under his arm, sober-faced. No excuses. No stress. No fatigue. No misunderstanding. He stood in front of my desk and said, Commander, I was wrong before I knew who you were. That's the sentence I keep coming back to. It was the first thing he'd said that made me believe the change might outlast the shame. So I told him about Caleb Strand. Not the classified parts. Not the things that live behind locked doors. But enough. The northern approach. The 46 minutes. The daughter whose picture he carried. The way one man's courage made room for 6 futures. Coltrane listened without moving. When I finished, he said, I'll carry his name correctly. We never became friends. That would make a cleaner story than the truth. What grew between us wasn't friendship. It was respect. And respect is often quieter, harder, and more useful than warmth. That spring I went to the memorial wall I'd avoided for 14 years. I found Caleb Strand's name in the stone and put my palm beneath it. The stone was cold. The sky was gray. A family passed behind me, slowed, then moved on with the careful silence people use around grief. 6 came home, I said. You bought them the time. For once, I said it where the world could hear me, and I didn't disappear. This whole thing taught me something I want to hand to you directly, because maybe you need it today. The mistake most of us make is believing that being quiet about our worth is the same as being humble. It isn't. Late humility is not the same thing as vanishing. Quiet strength is still strength. Serving people, loving people, doing the hard, unseen work, none of it requires you to erase yourself. And the people who only respect you after they find out your title, they were never the measure of what you're worth. So here's the one thing I'd ask you to do today. Think of someone whose strength is quiet, someone who does the unseen work and never gets the medal you can see, and tell them you noticed. Just that. Don't wait 14 years. And here's the question I want you to sit with tonight. Where in your own life have you mistaken disappearing for dignity? Now I want to hear from you, because this part matters to me. If you think I made the right call sparing his career, comment a 1. If you think he should have faced the police that morning, comment a 2. And if you're somewhere in the middle, still turning it over, comment a 3. Those are honestly my favorite comments to read. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is where you are right now. And be honest with me. Have you ever walked into a room where someone looked right through you, like you weren't even there? I read these. I really do. If this story stayed with you, do me a small favor and subscribe, so the next one finds you. We tell stories like this every day about dignity, about justice, about service and family, and the moments that quietly change a life. Stay with me for the next one. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences, fully rewritten and reimagined in Chicago to create original content. Any resemblance to real people or events is coincidental.